This is the only book you are going to need to understand why you struggle in relationships. Whether that be intimate relationships, whether that be friendships, or any kind of interpersonal relationships, it is based off of a specific dynamic that has essentially risen from the way you were raised as a child. When it comes down to it, all of your connections, whether it's with friends, whether it's with your girlfriend, boyfriend, whatever, there is a specific reason as to why you clash, why you have arguments with your partner. It all kind of stems from the psychological concept known as attachment theory. And this is essentially what the book talks about. Essentially what it means is that your connections with the people you have in your life now stem from the deepest connections of intimacy that you have built with your caregivers. And your caregivers being your mother and your father. Now you form a deepest connection with the opposite sex because for some reason as a child you look at that person as intriguing because it's not of your gender, right? So if you're a girl, you build the most intimate relationship with your father, and then if you are a male, you build the most intimate relationship with your mother. That essentially impacts you as you grow older. Now, based on how you received love in the past is what you are going to essentially model in your current relationships, which means that if you were not given enough love as a child, you would have a sense of abandonment today, which would cause you to seek out love out of anxiety and being afraid to lose it. If, however, love was not really given to you all that much and was kind of uncertain, you got criticized a lot, you were told to stop crying, you were generally made unsafe to feel your emotions, what happens is that you go the other route. You start to shy away from intimacy. And this is exactly what I want to talk to you today about, because this book generally highlights 3 different attachment styles. However, I do want to essentially include a 4th one because the book does not include it. So, first and foremost, you have the secure attachment style. Now, this is 50% of the entire population. People are mostly secure. That's when you receive enough love from your caretakers. You feel that it is safe to essentially express how you feel. You were born in a relatively healthy environment. Now, the other form of attachment is the insecure or anxious attachment. Now, typically people who inherit this type of attachment generally felt unsafe in their intimate relationships. What does that mean? It means that the person who gave you love as a child was the same person that also instilled punishment on you. This causes the child to be unsure whether they are going to be punished or whether they are going to be rewarded. And what happens is the child becomes anxious. Then you have the avoidant style, which basically means that you were constantly criticized, there was little to no reward in your intimate relationships, and so the child learns that they essentially need to rely on their own emotions and handling it in their own way. This causes the child to withdraw from other people and only rely on themselves and essentially value their autonomy. Finally, the 4th attachment style is the disorganized attachment style, which is the combination of anxious and avoidant attachment style together. So, to give you a quick summary of the two, the anxious attachment style heavily craves intimacy, and if they do not get enough intimacy, they start to get anxious. The avoidant person, however, is scared of intimacy. They want to shy away from intimacy, they want nothing to do with people. So what happens when you're that fearful avoidant attachment / disorganized? What ends up happening is that you crave intimacy, but at the same time, if you get too close, you push it away. Because as a child, you learned that although you received love, you do crave it, but every time you got too close, you got punished for it, which is the backing away part. Now, disorganized attachment, I believe like 5% of the population are like that. Unfortunately, a boy got distilled with that. Anxious attachment, I believe, is about 25% of the population, and then avoidant are about 20%. So, where do these things evolutionarily stem from? Why do we even have attachment styles? Well, in order for the human species to survive, we rely on each other. That is what caused us to progress as a society. We learned to work together, and our lifespan essentially increased. Because back when we were cave people, we only relied on ourselves. However, that quickly turned out to be a very bad survival strategy, because we would often die if we were not in packs. And so, what our ancestors learned is that by forming bands and relationships with each other, we were able to further grow as society and also survive for longer. And thus, attachment styles started to form. Bands that were often killed very often in certain regions, they had to develop an avoidant type of attachment, where the person can quickly essentially move along and forget about the people that were closest to them in order to not be hurt and in order to keep on living. The anxious attachment tribe, those were the people that were extremely close-knit together, and they saw that if one of the people were lost or essentially died off, it put them in a worse survival situation, so they got anxious about it. And secure is what we have now. Now, secure attachment is essentially wired into us as human beings because that's what helps us survive, hence why 50% of the population is as such. So, if you are on the unfortunate side of being an anxious or an avoidant, or both, disorganized, that is not your normal state of how to function in society. Why does this pertain to relationships with people? Because if you have fights, if you get defensive, if you start to play games with people or like not respond for a long time, if somebody doesn't respond to you for a long time, these are all things that are called protest behaviors. Now, a protest behavior is essentially a behavior that either is an action that gets you close to your partner or away from your partner. In an anxious attachment style, protest behaviors might be trying to get your intimate partner's attention. You know, whether it's playing games, not responding, constantly stalking them on social media. Those are all anxious protest behaviors because they essentially make you want to get closer to your partner. You're not getting enough of them. It's like a human defense mechanism. With avoidant attachment styles, there's a concept called deactivating strategies, which essentially means that it's strategies of thoughts or actions by the avoidant person that they use in order to essentially cut themselves off from any kind of intimate relationship, whether that be with a partner or a friend. So that's a defense mechanism that they use that they might not even know about just to protect themselves, because that's what they experienced as a kid. So whenever you have any kind of interpersonal problems, it's very important to realize that in a way, it is not really their fault, because the type of upbringing that they had is what caused them to develop these type of attachment styles. However, the number one thing you can do is become aware of it. Now, I'm going to say this again, this is the only video you will ever need to watch to truly understand relationship dynamics. So what you have to memorize is that avoidance and anxious people tend to attract each other. Now, this is due to the fact that they fulfill each other's beliefs about themselves and about the relationship. Avoidant people get too much of the anxious person, which fulfills their belief that they need even more space. The anxious person is fulfilled by the avoidant person because the anxious person is proved that they need that much more intimacy because they don't have enough of it, which is what the avoidant person proves to the anxious person. So, and you can get kind of stuck in this anxious avoidant vicious cycle, and it is very important to realize that that is happening, because in those types of relationships, if there's no self-awareness, it is not going to get better. And the number one telltale sign, whether you are in that vicious loop, is if your relationship feels like a roller coaster. Okay, if there's constant games playing around, if there's pulling away, if there's no secure kind of communication, that is how you know whether you are in one, essentially. Couple of ways in which we react if we are the anxious type is, as I've said, you tend to overtext, you tend to get too preoccupied with the relationship that you have, so much so that you constantly think about this person and you tend to stop focusing on your daily life tasks, whether it's your job, your business, your healthy habits, all that stuff. If you're the avoidant person, you are going to feel that you want your sense of autonomy, you don't want people overstepping your boundaries, you kind of always leave things up for interpretation for the other person because you don't want to commit. And so those are telltale signs if they are avoidant. Now, typically it doesn't matter if a guy or a girl is anxious or avoidant because anybody can be, but usually women would be the anxious and then men would be avoidant. However, like I said, that can always be flipped. And so essentially what the book teaches us is that if you think that the way you are is normal and you're experiencing all of these interpersonal problems, it is likely just your upbringing that needs to be fixed. This is why we need to do the inner child work. This is why we're not just working out and getting gains, but we're also working on our mindset so we can better operate as a human being in society. So developing a secure attachment comes with, proper effective communication, hearing the other person out, no blaming, no generalizing whenever you do have a conflict, such as saying things like, you always do that, you never do that, because that gets the other person's guard up. Like I said, this is like the only video you will ever have to watch to truly understand attachment theory. But essentially, if you are afraid of intimacy, but you at the same time want it, but you're scared of getting hurt, that is where that stems from. That deep childhood experience where your parents maybe did not give you enough love, but they also punished you for it. And as a tip for future parenting, the last thing you want to do is tell your child to stop crying or be like, oh, stop crying or I'll give you a reason to cry. Because you're essentially teaching the child how to not cope with their emotions, and all those anxieties start to eventually resurface back up in their life. And this is what causes them to need a therapist later down the line, and this is why all of your relationship tends to fail. Because here's the thing, if this pattern is still set in stone, you are going to keep repeating the same pattern relationship after relationship. It's not like once you find the one, which by the way is an avoidant attachment type of thinking, that everything is going to be okay. No, every healthy relationship has its conflicts. It's how you handle it is what matters. Because here's the thing, at the end of the day, we are all just 8-year-old adults. We still have hardwired needs and emotions, that of an 8-year-old. We're just older, but all of the circuitry from childhood is still there. So unless you manually go into it and you start fixing all of these things, you're going to just keep repeating the same shit over and over again and then wonder why you're still alone or why your friendships are not as deep as they could be. So, really great book. I obviously can't cover absolutely everything. Like, I could probably talk more about each individual attachment style, the anxious, the avoidant, the disorganized, but that could probably be a topic for like future videos and stuff like that. But hopefully that actually helps you understand yourself better and why you're struggling. If you like this kind of video, make sure you drop a like and a subscribe, and then I will be making more videos like this sometime in the future. Peace.